Shalom, you guys. Welcome back to the channel. Been a while. I found something that I didn't realize I still had. But you guys, this is a really good video of my long gone friend, Chuck Missler. Chuck was a friend of mine. We got to have many conversations together. He was very interested in what I was doing with codes. And he was sort of like a father figure, a mentor to me. We talked many times on the phone and emails and at conferences and things, but I just so happened to come across this and was fascinated the amount of in this interview, which is 13 years ago, how accurate he is and what was to come. So guys, if you would, please enjoy this video. One from the vault, Chuck Missler. I think you'll enjoy this. Please give us a thumbs up and share if you would. One from the vault, you guys. I think you'll enjoy it. By the way, at the end of this video, there's something happened with the video part of it, like the last 3 minutes. The audio is fine. The video part of it cuts out for some reason. But really good video, really good interview of Chuck Missler from 13 years ago.
Guest. We've been trying for a number of years to get Chuck Missler on the program, and I'm so glad he's here with us today. He's a wealth of knowledge on end-time prophecy. He was a successful businessman, and he's now an internationally respected Bible teacher, and he's here, of course, to talk about prophetic events and the times we're living in. You need to know the times we live in. Chuck, it's great to have you.
Great
Jewish Voice. Welcome. As I said, we've been trying to get you in the program for a number of years. You're off all over the country. You're in such demand, and getting to speak with you for a while, I see why.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Believe me,
it's an honor. I read your bio today, and I was amazed. You have such an interesting past. You went to the Naval Academy. You served a successful career in the Air Force, then a successful businessman, and now you're a Bible teacher. Talk about how the evolution of
well,
this whole
actually,
thing.
when I was just a small child, I discovered the Bible, and I became fascinated with it. I was a techie, a geek, we'd call them today. I was a radio ham when I was 9. I was always a technical thing.
You built a computer in your home in the 60s,
yeah,
right?
that was very early in the whole games. Yeah, actually 50s, my friend. But the point is that along the way, I became fascinated with the Bible, and that was probably my primary hobby. I've been very self-indulgent hobby-wise through my life, but that was probably I just got very interested in it very early. My technical specialty became the information sciences, and along the way, I think what captivated me was I made 2 discoveries in my life. The first is that these 66 books we call the Bible are an integrated message. I don't mean just thematically, that there's a theme in the old, fulfill the new. No, I came to the discovery for me that every detail seems to be there deliberately by design. And
sounds like an engineer.
Very much so, exactly.
And this is also, you guys, one of the reasons why he had a huge interest in Bible codes.
But the second discovery that emerges from that discovery is the realization that if that's an integrated message system, its origin had to come from outside time, because it writes history before it happens. And that's exactly what Isaiah says. There's an attribute of God that he uses to authenticate his message. He alone knows the end from the beginning, and by writing it with such precision, it authenticates the message. So
this is why the codes are important, folks. He understood that.
I became fascinated with that even in my teens. But as I went through my college years and got into a career environment, I treated my Bible studies, that was my recreation. I just enjoyed that. I taught for 25 years, I taught the Monday night studies at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, a prominent venue in where we lived. But it wasn't until about 20 years ago that an old friend of mine by the name of Hal Lindsey recruited me into the full-time ministry. He says, Chuck, has it ever occurred to you to make your hobby your profession? He was sensitive to the fact that by then there were enough tapes floating around just by people passing them on that I had a following of sorts. And he says that, he pointed out that as an independent, you normally can't make it without sponsorship, but he says, you've got enough of a following, you could do what you enjoy most. And so anyway, to make a long story short, he was the one that really got me to, I never took myself seriously as a Bible teacher. But of course that was, the Lord blessed it, and that's what I do. I switched, made what was my profession, which was a professional director. I served on 12 boards. I was chairman and CEO of 6 different public companies. 4 of those were defense contractors. So I was in this strategic arena for most of my executive career. So I really, about 20 years ago, in the second career, going at it full time and taking it seriously, publishing and writing, and that's what we do now. We formed a think tank called Coin Institute, and we have members now in 70 countries, and people who have in common, they take the Bible seriously. So that's what we do.
It's fantastic. And you're a font of information and intelligence information.
Well, that's a key thing. That's a key thing I might point out, is as the think tank emerged, one of the things we realized, we really have 3 different avenues of study. What we call the Berean Avenue. That's the verse by verse, chapter by chapter study of the Bible. That takes precedence over everything. But what makes us different?
Chuck Smith has devoted his life.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And Chuck and Hal and Walter Martin were my mentors in real ways. But the second avenue that emerged in the Institute, we call, for lack of another term, the Issachar Avenue. I heard you quote 2 Chronicles 12:32. To be like the sons of Issachar, who understood the times and knew what their country had to do. So we've discovered that prophecy and stewardship, the tools are different than the Berean. The Berean Avenue, you know the Bible's true, the challenge is to understand it. The other avenue, namely the Issachar, you're dealing with intelligence reports, news clips, things you know are biased, sometimes deliberately, sometimes inadvertently. The tools of study are very different. And that's what distinguishes the Institute from, say, a Bible college. And then the third leg of the stool we call koinonos, which is motivated by it's the practical doing. It's motivated by the third commandment. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, which we argue has nothing to do with vocabulary. It has to do with ambassadorship. If you're going to take the name of the king, who is Jewish, of course, if you're going to take the name of the king, you need to be prepared to represent him competently and faithfully. So those 3 legs really constitute the institute that we encourage and promote. And whatever.
Well, I want to talk with you today. I want to focus in on Israel.
Good.
I've been spending a lot of time lately on the Middle East situation. In fact, I just completed a short book, and I'm expanding it on is peace possible in the Middle East? Because not only do you have the historic enemies of Israel, the countries surrounding Israel, but then all of these terrorist groups now that Israel has to deal with inside of their own land. And of course the constant pressure to give away land. We know that land for peace doesn't work. We see that with the Gaza Strip, which has become a staging ground now for military attacks. Do you think peace is possible?
No, I don't think so. Not until Israel returns to their source, which is God Himself. And I see that in the last verse of Hosea 5, verse 15, where God speaking through Hosea says, "I will return to my place," which is an interesting phrase. That must mean He left it. I must return to my place until they acknowledge their offense. That's singular and specific, namely the rejection. In their affliction, they will seek me earnestly. And so to me, that verse clarifies the whole role, and it also tells me what the so-called Great Tribulation is really about.
Matthew 23, you will not see me again.
Exactly.
You who dwell in Jerusalem until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is you comes in the name of the Lord.
So in the meantime, though, I think God has a lot to say about those people who would dare to partition His land. So we'll be watching. I personally, ask me what my perspective is. I don't see any peace until the Prince of Peace comes. In the meantime, though, God still has His hand on them.
Yeah, and very, very clearly. I want to target Ezekiel 38 and 39 for a few minutes, because I'm very clear on Romans 9 through 11. As a Jewish believer, that's my life. My heart's desire and prayer for Israel is that they might be saved, and helping Christians to understand that God still loves the Jewish people. He's faithful to the Jewish people, and we can base our trust in God being faithful to us on his faithfulness to the Jewish people. But the whole Gog-Magog Armageddon scenario has really been a challenge for me. In fact, Chuck, I shared with you that it brought me into eventual salvation because I was drawn to go to a Bible study that was talking about the book of Revelation and how the world comes to an end as a Jewish druggie looking for the meaning of life. Sure. I found that very intriguing and bumped into Yeshua along the way there.
Sure.
But I'm really, I reread these today in preparation for our time together. I want you to talk specifically about Gog, Magog, Tubal, and Meshach. Who are these figures in Ezekiel 38 and 39?
Well, let's take the first one, which is a very strange word, the word Gog, because it's very unusual in the Bible to have a very key player emerge without some background. And suddenly we're confronted with Gog in Ezekiel 38. But I've stumbled into an interesting passage in Amos chapter 7, verse 1, which if you read in your English Bible doesn't make any sense at all. But if you read it in the Septuagint, which it's amazing to me that more people don't lean on the Septuagint, because you're talking about a 900-year advantage over the Masoretes.
You are indeed. 250 BC.
Yeah, and so we have, it identifies Gog as the king of the locusts. Now, locusts, we're not talking about natural locusts, because Proverbs, I think it's 30:27, says that the locusts have no king. When you study Revelation 9, you find the word locust there used idiomatically of demons, obviously. And so that all comes up if you're studying Revelation 9. Well, when you hit Amos 7:1 in the Septuagint, and you discover Gog is a title of a demon king, not necessarily the number one guy, but obviously one of his key lieutenants or whatever, it clarifies a number of things, because there's another mystery about Gog and Magog, because it shows up twice. Clearly, the Ezekiel 38 passage occurs prior to the second coming of Christ. And yet, after 1,000 years, after the millennium, we see an allusion made to Gog and Magog again. For Magog to be around 1,000 years later, well, that's the name of a people, ethnologically. But Gog is a title. It makes sense when you realize Gog is a title of a demon king. So it illuminates that mystery. But getting back to the question, Gog is simply the leader, the demonic leader of Magog. It may be idiomatic of or maybe a specific person, or it may be idiomatically used of the group. The real issue is who's Magog, one of the sons of Japheth. And so what you're confronted with, of course, in Ezekiel 38 is all these different peoples are mentioned by their forebears. And they have to be. Because see, you and I, we keep changing the names of things. You know, and if you're Isaiah and God called you to talk about the Persian Empire 100 years before it shows up in history, how do you talk about it? By Elam, you speak of their forebears. And you mentioned you were in St. Petersburg. You know, there's a city that keeps changing its name, whether it's Leningrad or Petersburg, Petrograd, depends on what year you're talking about. My Russian friends say in Russia even the past is uncertain. You know, So who is Magog? Magog is the descendants of Magog is a challenge. We fortunately have several key sources. Hesiod, which is a Greek didactic poet, speaks, and actually slightly ahead of Ezekiel in time, speaks of the descendants of Magog as the Scythians. Herodotus, who's known as the father of history, writes extensively about the descendants of Magog, namely the Scythians. And so we would associate them to the people, the southern steppes of Russia. Some would say Russia in general, could be, but more specifically it's the southern steppes. But what's interesting is you go through those tribes, they're armed and led, according to Ezekiel, by Magog. Well, that's exactly who is arming and leading those various peoples even today. One reason that Ezekiel 38 is so prominent to most Bible students is for two reasons. One is this attempted invasion is intervened. God intervenes that attack, and that in itself is significant because He very overtly is preventing that going forward. The second reason it's so well known, it appears to allude to nuclear weapons. When you get to chapter 39, which is the cleanup after the battle, you discover that they wait 7 months before entering. Oh, first of all, there are hailstones of fire and all these cosmic things happening. But then they hire professionals to clear the battlefield. They wait 7 months before entering the battlefield. Then they take 7 months to clear the battlefield. And the Holy Spirit even adds something in chapter 39. If a passenger passing through that area sees something that the professionals, what the professionals do, they clear the battlefield and they bury what they find east of the Dead Sea. Read that downwind. And if somebody passing through that area sees something the professionals have missed, he doesn't touch it. He marks the location, lets the professionals deal with it. You know, that is very contemporary procedures. Anybody that's been briefed in nuclear, biological, chemical warfare knows the drill. And so that kind of language in Ezekiel 39 catches your attention. Because again, see, my premise is there's nothing in there accidental. Everything in there is deliberate. And I think that, to me at least, I infer that we're talking about very contemporary weapons technology. But now the big debate about that passage is, does it occur? See, very competent scholars like Hal Lindsey and others see that whole event as part of the Armageddon scenario, as outlined in Daniel 11, that it's part of the climactic end. There are some of us, and I side with them, that believe the Ezekiel 38 event occurs before the 70th week of Daniel. It's not part of the Armageddon scenario, in fact. And there's some technical reasons we hold that view. Doesn't mean we're right or wrong. It's not my point. My point is there are good scholars that have different views exactly where that places. But I think what most people have overlooked is Psalm 83, because there's an event that occurs prior, I believe, to the Ezekiel 38 event. The Ezekiel 38 event, if you go through all those tribes and try to identify them, they're an outer ring of peoples. What's strange, and their motivation in Ezekiel 38 is taking spoil, gold, silver, cattle, and goods. They see that as that's their motivation, is to take advantage. When you get to Psalm 83, there's two things that leap out at you. One is that the players there are not the same players as Ezekiel 38. In fact, they're the immediate neighbors. Second thing that leaps out at you is the motivation isn't spoil. It's to wipe Israel off the map. So as you read Psalm 83, it's rather startling because it sounds like it's drawn from current headlines. You can almost see Ahmadinejad saying, wiping Israel off the map. When I first heard
sworn to do.
When I first heard him say that, I rejoiced. That's the first time I ever heard them admit they were on their map. So, but the point is,
only a prophecy teacher rejoices at such a.
No, but the point really is that the immediate neighbors confederate with the specific objective of wiping off the map, and the psalmist, last of the Asaph Psalms, calls for God to deal with that, and so there is a scenario that's inferred here, is that Israel will succeed against them. God is going to, and that creates the prosperity that causes them to be a target for Ezekiel 38.
So two separate events.
Yes.
One that Israel prospers in that ultimately brings about the efforts for total destruction.
And my view, and I mentioned there aren't many that hold this view, I should admit very quickly. Bill Salas, who wrote a good book, a couple of others hold this view.
We've had Bill on the program.
Okay, well, so that I hold
and
that.
Steve Spillman, another one who.
Sure. But if Israel, and now there's another piece of the scenario that's speculative, and so I don't know if we should even get into this about Iran and the nuclear capability of Iran.
We might as well.
Okay, all right. Iran is after a nuclear weapon for reasons most people don't realize. Those of us that have a heart for Israel tremble because of a nuclear Iran is a threat to Israel. What most people are not aware of is a 1,400-year war that's about to erupt between most of us that know a little bit about Islam, most of us know very little about Islam. That's the first mistake. But secondly, don't realize there are two houses that hate each other almost as much as they hate the Jews. And the Shiites,
which has been of help to Israel, by the way.
Yes, well, the Shiites and the Sunnis, and the conventional wisdom, there's about 80% of Islam is Sunni, 20% is Shiite. That's because the Shiites are not counted in a Sunni country. We don't know how many Shiites there are, but Shiites are primarily two Iranians and Yemen. Now, this war started with a dinner. Some say it was lamb, some say it was goat, but it was poison. When Muhammad took that first bite, he spit it out. He knew it was poison, but it was too late. He died. And the succession after him split the house in two houses. And from that started wars that have gone on for 1,400 years. And so, but we need to understand the mindset of Iran. This isn't a third world country. This is a country that ruled the world at one time. Persia held off the Roman Empire for 300 years.
And very few know that the Arab world are terrified of Iran.
Exactly.
In fact.
And that's another mistake that we
they're not Arabs.
Not to use the word Arab when the word we really want to use is Muslim. Okay, so, but understand how much, you have to understand how much the Shiites hate the Sunnis. And they remember vividly when Saudi Arabia funded Iraq to throw chemical warfare against Iran in the 8-year. The other myth that gets promoted is that if it wasn't for Israel, we'd have peace in the Middle East. That's utter nonsense. Take Israel out of the picture for a minute. You had an 8-year war between Iraq and Iran. It had nothing to do with Israel. And so the point is the hatred of the Shiites see a chance to regain their previous dominance, and the nuclear weapon, their primary use of it would be against Saudi Arabia. You look at if you watch the news today, you're aware of the business in Yemen. You need to stand back and realize that Iran controls the southern third of Iraq, where most of the oil is. And you look at all this from the point of Saudi Arabia, they're surrounded. They got Yemen coming from, well, first of all, Iran controls the Straits of Hormuz. 90% of the Middle East oil goes through the Straits of Hormuz. Through Yemen, they also have the Gate of Tears. So, and Yemen is on the south edge of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is terrified right now. Now, the United States is supporting Saudi Arabia, but exactly where that's all going to head. Now, stop and realize, if we're in a speculative mood, what President Obama could accomplish if he chose to take out the nuclear capability of Iran. Overnight, he would become the hero to most of the Muslim world, the Sunnis. He also could turn on his heel to Netanyahu and say, now you owe me one. So,
a big one.
A big one. So, and as you look at the emergent capability now it's been stalled thanks to cyber warfare by, we assume, Israel, the nuclear capability, but that's just a stall. How are we going to prevent?
Nobody's referring to the virus that. Brilliant.
Right. It's a whole other part of the story. But so yes, I'm getting at is a suspicion I hold. If that should happen, the strong suit, militarily speaking, of Israel is a tank corps, and if they had the backbone and the guts to go after the Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the south and use that opportunity while that's going on, just to seal off their borders and say to the world, up yours, and we're a nation now.
Beep.
Yep. Yeah. Beep. Bleep. Yeah. So I've drifted off in just some peripheral speculations, but I mentioned them primarily because I think the turmoil there can take some turns that we can't really suspect. And that's one reason why I think we are well served to study very carefully Ezekiel 38 and 39, because there's a lot of detail there that's worth talking about.
Let me talk about turns, because
Okay.
I remember before the collapse of the Iron Curtain, all of the prophetic books talking about the invasion from the north. Get ready, the invasion from the north. I didn't read any book that talked about the collapse of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the Iron Curtain. That was a real twist, and it's a twist that ended up leading me to actually live in Russia for 3 years. Now I'm seeing things change. The missionary activity in Russia is coming to a close. Russia's rehardening again, the conflict with the U.S., the tensions with the U.S. again, and now I'm seeing the scenario coming back into focus with Russia. So let's go back to Ezekiel 38:39, and I want you to I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, put a transparency over the current countries now, and give us a scenario of the countries that exist now and how you see them fitting into Ezekiel 38:39.
Well, as we do that, by the way, what's interesting aren't just the countries by their ancient names. We can go through that if you like. But the ones that are missing. Sheba and Dedan are not part of the attacking group. Sheba and Dedan are standing on the sidelines saying, hey, what are you doing? And that would be presumably Saudi Arabia and Yemen, maybe, depending on how you want to make those identities. The other thing, as we start to look at that, recognize that there are three groups of people. You've got Magog and all his allies trying to invade Israel, except God is going to intervene, obviously. You've got, obviously, Israel. There's a third party alluded to in verse 6 of chapter 39. Because by the time you get to through 38, you get to 39 is mostly the cleanup after the battle, but God sort of summarizes, these hailstones of fire are going to fall upon Magog and among those who dwell carelessly in the isles or coastlands. Who are they? They're not part of the invading force. You know, it's a third party that somehow gets clobbered in the melee that takes place. Now that leads to conjectures. So it's always dangerous to get into conjectures, I suppose. But one of the things that when we travel and we have a question and answer period, there are two questions that always come up. One question in a large audience, someone will say, "Where's the United States in prophecy?" The question doesn't come up in Asia or Europe, by the way. They think it's arrogant for us to even ask that. And there are a lot of books written about that I don't happen to seek to agree with. One of the conjectures, the problem is that America, all the major players in eschatological passage are well identified, but the United States is obviously not one of them. One of the conjectures is that we may be those people who dwell securely in the isles, meaning that as this tension occurs, as Magog starts to move against Israel, it might be the United States that saber rattles, very analogous in a sense to the Cuban Missile Crisis, where there's some brinksmanship going on. But in contrast to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was a very skillful standoff that went well, this is one.
Thank God.
Yes, but this is one that doesn't go well. Somebody does something stupid, and there's an exchange. And maybe it's our nukes that are the hailstones of fire that wipe out Magog's invading forces, and we take a hit, and as a result, we also get an overdue judgment on the country. And so that may be the
first I've heard.
Yeah, well, that's just a speculation. That's just a speculation.
Anything can happen.
As I read Ezekiel 39, verse 6, that's one of maybe 3 or 4 possible reasonable scenarios there.
Well, you've put together a fascinating teaching that we're actually going to offer called the Magog invasion. So I want to crystallize this, okay? Because you're talking about an invasion that precedes the Battle of Armageddon,
and an invasion that is not successful. In other words, now there's a very key point. The God openly intervenes in history to prevent that invasion from being successful. And so that causes me to believe it's after the harpazo.
Okay, so we're talking about clearly Russia orchestrating this, right?
Russia,
The North is
yes,
mentioned.
yes.
And it's not North America, it's not North Carolina.
No. In fact, it says the uttermost parts to the north. If you look at it, you don't have to have all the ethnological background. You look at map, look at Israel, and look what's due north of that, and it's on a globe, and you're talking about
So Russia is the kingpin of this attempted
according
invasion.
to Ezekiel, it's the leader and the supplier of the arms.
And it includes what other nations do you go ahead and conjecture?
Well, it would include the Eastern Bloc. It would include Turkey. Meshech and Tubal were cities on the coast of Meshech and Tubal, very prominent, and some scholars would isolate not Russia at large, but the Central Asian group. But that's splitting hairs in my point of view. In my view, the Scythians dominated the southern steppes of Russia from the Ukraine to China, from the 10th century BC through about the 3rd century BC. So I think that's just, in fact, the Great Wall of China was built to keep them out.
Syria involved?
Syria, absolutely.
Iran? In partnership with
yes, in fact, Persia, Iran is a key player with Magog, absolutely.
And it fails. Israel, that's clear in Ezekiel 38 and 39.
That God intervenes.
That God intervenes.
Yes.
Stops the forces.
And that's why some good scholars, I happen to see it a little differently, but most good scholars, I'd use Hal Lindsey as my example, tie that all into the Armageddon scenario as they see it profiled in Daniel 11.
Well, I want you to talk about the Armageddon scenario as you understand it, at least at this point.
Okay. Well, I tend to see the Ezekiel 38 event occurring prior to the 70th week of Daniel. Okay. And be that as it may, the 70th is a 7-year period, triggered in the middle with the abomination of desolation, the desecration of the temple. This world leader has come to power by then. Enforces a covenant that he violates in the middle of the 7-year period. The Lord Jesus Christ himself labels the last 3.5 years as the Great Tribulation, quoting from Daniel 12. That climaxes into the Battle of Armageddon, which is interrupted by the second coming of Christ. But I don't see the Ezekiel 38 event there for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the 7-month cleanup and some things just don't fit.
Okay. It's really a divergent view from much of what I've read.
Well, where two people.
But that's okay.
No, where two people agree, one is redundant, right?
and keep going with the Armageddon scenario, because this is fascinating to me.
Well, the Armageddon scenario, yeah. It's very interesting. There is no Battle of Armageddon, by the way. Armageddon is to the attack in Jerusalem what England was to the Normandy invasion. In other words, the gathering place. He gathered them in Jezreel. And what's their real target? They think their target is Jerusalem, except the remnant have fled, presumably, to Petra or to secure what was temporary, some security. And what's interesting is when Jesus comes back, according to Isaiah 63, that's where he comes back to fight those that are after the remnant. You know, I could never figure out why Satan hasn't given up. In other words, we're taught that at the cross, his doom was sealed. And yet he's so busy still trying to undo God's plan, okay? Well, we discover by studying Hosea and some other passages, there is a prerequisite condition to the second coming. And that's for Israel to petition it. And so once I realized that, I suddenly understood why Satan is so hostile to not just the Jews in general, but the believing Jews particularly. Because in his mind, if he can thwart that, he can thwart the plan of God.
Absolutely.
And
I agree with you 100%.
Once that fog lifted, then it became clear to me. And that's why all forms of prejudice are evil. But
it's the role that the Jewish people play in the return that's equally as important as they played in his first coming. That's just missed by so many in the church.
But have you ever studied the speech by Stephen before the Sanhedrin in Acts 7? If you outline that, you discover something very interesting. Because, see, they didn't let him finish. They stoned him. But if you outline the speech all the way through, he always points out from the beginning, they don't get it the first time. They get it the second. Even Abraham's call, He has that subtle insight. God had said and so forth. That he was supposed to leave. He moved upriver for 25 years till his father died. Then he fulfilled. But Stephen makes that point all the way through. All the way through, they don't get it the first time. They get it the second. They don't get it and he builds up to the fact that the Messiah came and they killed him. They didn't let him finish. See, the second time they'll get it, and it'll tie it off, So it's, anyway.
And I see the same thing repeated in Peter's preaching before the men of Israel, where he says, you men repent and turn from your sins, so that times of refreshing may come, and then says restitution of all things, and then it talks about Jesus actually waiting in the heavenlies for the restoration of all things.
Yeah.
There's clearly a key role that the Jewish people play in all this.
Very much so. So, in any case, that's why I see God's intervention on the Magog thing as a preamble before even the Armageddon scenario. And that's just a view. Yeah.
So the motives of the first invasion that fail.
Now,
plundering.
You're talking about the Psalm 83 thing?
No, I'm talking first about Ezekiel 38.
Okay, Ezekiel.
The motivation is to plunder the riches.
Yes, exactly. By the way, that's another key point. They go to take spoil all the way through there as God recounts what's good, the thoughts in the
Psalm 83, it's to wipe them off.
And that's earlier. See, I think that's a preamble. I may be wrong, but I think Bill Salas's perspective on that is the one I would concur with, that I think it's a preamble thing that creates a prosperity to make them a target. Now, meanwhile, becoming a target, the oil, the $1 trillion worth of natural gas and so forth starts to make them an attractive target already. So,
do you see crude being found there as well as part of this?
I'm not an expert in that. I hear most of it's natural gas, or there may be some.
Plenty of it.
Yeah, and how?
Plenty of it.
And how? Yeah.
No one knows for sure how this scenario will play out, other than one thing for sure: Jesus will return and will be victorious.
Yes, and the key point. Yeah, exactly. I've sort of taken some liberties here in the fringes, but the real point I wanted to get across, I think there's been no time like now to really re-examine all these passages, because the Word of God is more available to us than it's ever been from the beginning. You can go to the original, the Hebrew and the Greek, without knowing Hebrew or Greek, with modern tools. The information appliances we have are breathtaking.
You don't even have to pay for it anymore. It's all on the internet.
And the software is free and so forth. And you can put your little cursor on any word in the translation, and it'll pop up what the word really was, what parts of speech. It'll even diagram the sentence if you want. And it's all free. It's all free. And so, which leaves us without excuse.
Chuck was proclaiming in the 80s, it's any day now he's going to return. But when you look at the scenario in the 80s compared to today,
oh, yeah.
Who would have ever thought? I interrupted you. I want you to continue. It's just amazing to me.
No, that's my real point isn't to sell a point of view. I express some of my points of view primarily just so you have a perspective. But I think every one of us should do two things. Find out what the Bible really says. Not what Chuck Missler says or whoever, what the Bible really says. Then the second thing is you got to find out what's going on. And that's not as easy as it sounds. Because I think most of us that are aware at all realize that you won't find out on the 10 o'clock news. You've got to do some homework with the resources on the internet and the alternative press and ministries like your own. These are resources that are crucial to the believer, because I think what has to happen is to understand what the Bible really says, and then do enough, be aware of what's really going on, so you can see, so you can perceive the convergence of what's going on. And when you look at what's happening in the details, people are watching the little Yemen thing going on because of some uprisings and so forth, because of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and Libya and so forth. It's another one of those. No, it's a piece of a strategic puzzle if you really look at the whole story. I guess my point is, the more you understand what the Bible says, and the more you understand what's really going on, you really see it all coming together. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not setting dates. I'm not going to join that crowd.
But you're recognizing the seasons.
Exactly right. And from 1 Thessalonians 5, I don't believe the believers will be caught by surprise. In other words, they won't know that. I'm not suggesting you know the timing that way, but they'll know the seasons, because we're children of the day, not of the night. That day should overtake. Taking them by like a thief in the night is a phrase addressed to the children of the night, not the children of the day. If you study that Paul's passage there in 1 Thessalonians 5, he draws a distinction between those, the children of the night, to whom he comes as a thief in the night, and those of their day that are not of the night, that should overtake you as a thief. In other words, that clearly his presentation is there that the true believer will not be caught by surprise. He'll know he will be in an attitude of expectancy, not setting dates, but an attitude of expectancy.
Amen.
Yes.
Chuck, just in 1 minute, very simply, talk about some of the clear signs that you see that we are, in fact, in the last days preceding the return of Christ.
Oh, boy. Well, you always start, if you're looking at timelines, if you want to find out where you are on God's calendar, you look at Israel. You look at Israel. And the fact that they are two things. First of all, they're alone. The world's against them. Even America, for the first time in its history, has backed away from endorsing the right to exist. Our current administration has taken a step that is... our support of Israel through the years has been spotty. We've betrayed them. We've been clumsy. It's a pretty dismal story when you really look behind the scenes. But at least officially, we were behind them. For the first time, we're even officially cutting loose. And that terrifies me. I said earlier, there's two questions that we always get. One is, where's the United States of Providence? The other question we always get is, why hasn't God judged America? Billy Graham quipped so colorfully several decades ago, if God doesn't judge America, he'll have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. Thomas Jefferson said the same thing in 1781. He said, I tremble for my country when I recall that God is just and that his justice will not sleep forever. I harbor the fear that God's abandonment wrath has already started against America. And I think that, see, for years, when people say, why hasn't God judged America? My response has always been because of Genesis 12, verse 2 and 3. We've always stood for Israel. And I've always felt that our support of Israel was a shield to an overdue judgment. Because you look at America in terms of its moral decay, and you just may go through the list. It's amazing. See, I found a very peculiar statistic the other day. Did you know that all the people that died in wars in the United States since the beginning add up to about 1.3 million and change, so to speak? We murder 1.4 million every year in mothers' wombs. The blood of those kids cry out to God. So you start looking at America, and it's long overdue for judgment. If my premise in the past...
that's been deferred by support of Israel.
Support of Israel, but now with that support being, dissolved by our present administration, I tremble. Bill Koenig has a book. He has a premise that there's always a correlation between pushing Israel adversely and the storms and all. He has quite a little list that he does, and Bill's a good friend. I've never quite bought the full impact of his hypothesis, but if he's right, we can expect the biggest storm we've ever seen in view of the current situation. So I don't worry about Israel. I pray for it because the Scripture tells me to, and I know Israel's in God's hands. I tremble for America because I think the one thing that has protected us from an overdue judgment is gone, and so I think that we're facing some very, very serious challenges. Now the good news is, I think it's going to be a harvest for the kingdom the likes of which we haven't seen in our lifetime, because I think that people in the past who've been apathetic, complacent, are going to be desperately looking for answers in the coming months. I'm not talking about years, coming months. And if we do our homework, I think there's going to be a harvest for the kingdom, the likes of which... See, I'm not a Republican or Democrat. I'm a monarchist. And I work a Jewish king. So...
Theocratic.
Yeah, theocratic king.
Wonderful. I want to take advantage of... I know it's late, but I want to take advantage of Chuck here. This is so rare. and give some of you a chance to ask questions in the audience. Can we make that happen? And we'll just keep, if you keep
Sure.
your answers concise, because it is getting late, but I do
Sure.
want to give some people
Good.
a chance that have
Yes,
come
sir.
here to hear you to
This is the fun part for me. Yeah, you
ask their
betcha.
question.
My name is Linda Gross,
Linda?
and I have read some in Reformed theology and have suspected that they have a leaning towards a multiple rapture teaching for the end times. Do you have a perspective of that?
I don't think I personally don't hold in a partial rapture or a multiple rapture thing. I think Paul talks about the harpazo in 1 Thessalonians 4. I think it's alluded to surprisingly enough 3 times in the Old Testament. Most people don't know that, but it's clearly taught from John 14 on by the Lord, and in Paul's case, 1 Thessalonians 4 and also 2 Thessalonians 2. We know a great deal about it from there, and I see it as a singular event and not a multiple or partial rapture model. I don't happen to hold. We could go on and on about that, but in a concise response, I don't hold. I do look for the harpazo or the rapture as being the next event that we'll experience. There's no preceding event required.
Pre-tribulation or mid-tribulation?
Mid-tribulation and post-tribulation deny imminence. If you're going to hold the doctrine of imminence, which I believe the New Testament teaches, you really have to set those on the shelf. With all due respect to Marv Rosenthal and the rest, I think no, I'm a pre. But incidentally, we talked about Psalm 83. There's a great mystery in verse 3, as Asaph and his psalmist calls to God to deal with these people who are going to try to wipe Israel off the map. He says, they speak against you, God, and against your treasured hidden ones. What on earth he's alluding to? I don't know. But I wonder if that's the saints that have been raptured. I wonder if that event occurs after the rapture. I'm sure the Revelation, Ezekiel 38, 39 occurs after the rapture for a number of reasons. But I think that Psalm 83, if Psalm 83 is our near horizon, then the harpazo is even closer.
I just so love the deep mining of Scripture like this. It's wonderful. Tell us your name and your question for Chuck.
Hi, Mary Ladwick, and my question, Chuck, is what do you think about the September possible Palestinian state going into effect in September?
I didn't quite get this. What September?
The Palestinian state, do you think that will take place in September?
The UN vote.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen, but I think God's going to intervene with that. So I can't see that happening.
Okay, and another question, do you think that the final world government will be a caliphate?
It'll probably have some of those characteristics. I think it's more complex than that. We know from 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 9, it says that the coming world leader that we're talking about, he shall exalt himself above all that is called God. That includes Allah, but it's not limited to that. And I think the marriage between Islam and the Roman Catholic Church is something you need to be aware of. The Pope has declared the Muslims as saved because they worship one God, which is, of course, is just pure power politics, because I won't start on all that. The point is I see that conglomeration as being much more complex than, I don't think it's not as simple as pointing to the Vatican or pointing to Islam. I think it's going to be more complex. That's a quick answer. Okay.
Okay. Let's take a couple more. Tell us your name and your question for Chuck.
My name is Raleigh Halverson, and my question is, what do you believe about the Super Congress that is being formed? Do you believe it has anything to do with Bible prophecy? It's just an isolated event here in America. What's happening to us? What are your thoughts on the Super Congress?
The Super Congress?
Yeah.
I have no beliefs about the Super Congress. I have some very strange attitudes about our current government situation.
And I've got some questions off camera for you. I'll tell you that.
I spent 30 years in the strategic arena. Not just my service career, I was in the intelligence community, I was in the RAND Corporation, the think tank world. I also was chairman and CEO of 6 different public companies. 4 of those were publicly traded defense contractors. I say all that to point out that I'm not an America basher. I've spent my life in that world. But I have to be candid with you. The last few years have been the most painful of my life because that was in my blood. And I now look back on what I used to regard as patriotism as an obsolete form of idol worship. I'm not a Republican or Democrat. In fact, I think there's going to be huge turmoil because of the lack of leadership, of even having a response to all of this. If I had my way, the people that put him into office would be tried for treason. The congressman said, the senators and congressmen who took an oath to defend the Constitution should be tried for treason. For them to sign bills they don't.
Folks, this is what I mean. This is almost like he filmed this yesterday. You see what I mean? Incredible. Did you hear what he said about the last few years? I wish the video didn't cut out like this, but the audio is just fine. Incredible.
Don't read. For them to prostitute. Now there may be uprisings occurring between now and, you know about the Mayan calendar.
Yeah, I do.
It says that most people don't know there's a 45-day error in the Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar says the world comes to an end December 21 of the year 2012, right? Correct. Well, there's a 45-day error. The world comes to an end on the second Tuesday of November of 2012.
Might not be so far.
It took him a minute to get. I'm kidding about the election. The danger is there may be an armed uprising and they don't have enough leadership to succeed, so there's going to be some huge tragedies. You don't have hyperinflation without a change of regime. In this last century, there's been dozens of hyperinflation examples around the world, more than you may realize unless you've studied it. But they always occur with a change of regime. And that's probably what's going to happen to us.
Did you ever think you'd live to see the Constitution violated?
No. There was a day I signed up to die for my country. I wouldn't do that today.
No. Let's take one more question for Chuck. We have time for one more question. Tell us your name and your question for Chuck.
Right here. You already asked a question. Somebody else. Somebody else asked one. Who else? Somebody else have a question? There we go. Okay. Stand up for your name.
Tim Canfield. What do you feel is the literal interpretation of the Valley of Dry Bones from Ezekiel? I have a belief, but I just want to hear yours.
Oh, I think I have never seen any controversy about that. It's the reestablishment of Israel. Sure. I mean, the dry bones version is, in my mind, very crisp, very clear. And they come together, and flesh is put on the bones, but the spirit comes later. And there's a lot of aspects to that. But that's the prelude of chapter